9.1 Questions about Moolah. 1.
Where was Moolah walking when he saw the man?
Along the road, through the woods.
2.
What was the man carrying?
A dirty old sack.
3.
What did the man do when Moolah took his sack?
He sat down and cried.
4.
Where did Moolah put the man's sack?
In the middle of the road.
5.
How did the man feel when he got his sack back?
Very happy.
9.2 The story of Moolah and the miserable man.
A wise old man called Moolah was walking along the road through the woods when he saw a man walking towards him. The man was carrying a dirty old sack. He looked very unhappy, and when Moolah asked him why, the man told him his story. He was all alone because his wife had left him, and he was also poor and homeless because he had lost his job and his house. "Everything I own is in this old sack," he said. "My life is miserable." And he walked off. After the man had gone a few yards, Moolah ran past him, took his sack, and ran into the woods. The man was afraid to follow. He had heard it was easy to get lost in these woods. "Now my life is even more miserable," he said, and he sat down and cried. Meanwhile, further down the road, Moolah came out of the woods and put the man's sack in the middle of the road. Finally, when he had stopped crying, the man set off again, walking slowly and sadly. Suddenly, he saw his sack. "My sack!" he shouted. He picked it up. Everything was still inside it. He was overjoyed and walked happily on towards the city, singing as he went. "Well," said Moolah, "that's one way to make someone happy." The moral of the story is, appreciate what you have, however little.
9.3 Questions about the story. 1.
Why was the man all alone?
Because his wife had left him.
2.
Why was he poor and homeless?
Because he'd lost his job and his house.
3.
Why was he afraid to follow Moolah into the woods?
Because he'd heard it was easy to get lost in them.
4.
Why was his sack in the middle of the road?
Because Moolah had put it there.
5.
Why was he so happy?
Because he'd found his sack again with everything still inside it.
9.4 Pronunciation. 1.
He lost his job. He'd lost his job.
2.
We'd missed the bus. We missed the bus.
3.
They'd all left. They all left.
4.
But you met him before? But you'd met him before?
5.
I'd checked the doors. I checked the doors.
6.
She'd asked everybody. She asked everybody.
9.5 1.
I got a fabulous view of the Alps as we were flying over them.
2.
I felt tired all day yesterday because I hadn't slept much the night before.
3.
Just as I was falling asleep, the neighbour's dog started barking.
4,
Tom's new girlfriend seemed familiar. I was sure I'd seen her somewhere before.
5,
I was nervous before the flight because I'd never flown before.
6,
My brother rang me while I was out shopping.
9.6. The Professor and his Driver. Professor Higgs, one of the world's top astrophysicists, was giving a 6-month lecture tour of universities around Europe. He only had one more lecture to give before the tour ended. Higgs didn't like flying, so he travelled by car. He had his own driver because he was too tired to drive after he'd finished his lectures. One morning, as they were driving to the last lecture, his driver, Harry, said, "You know, Professor, I always sit in the hall when you give your lecture, and I know it so well by now, I think I could give it myself." Of course, Harry was only joking, but Professor Higgs knew Harry was a clever man, and he wanted to test the idea. As soon as they arrived at the university, the Professor and Harry swapped clothes. The Professor then sat quietly at the back of the hall while Harry gave the lecture. Harry had a fantastic memory and gave the lecture perfectly. He waited until the audience had finished clapping and started to leave the stage. Suddenly, someone stood up and said they wanted to ask a question. Harry listened to the long, complicated question, and then he spoke. That's a very good question, and although it seems a difficult one, the answer is actually very simple. In fact, it's so simple that I'm going to ask my driver to answer it for you. 9.7. Discussing grammar. 1,
I went to bed when I'd done my homework.
2,
After I'd driven 200 miles, I stopped for coffee.
3,
She bought a car as soon as she'd passed her driving test.
4,
I didn't go to live in Italy until I'd learnt Italian.
5,
Although I'd enjoyed reading the book, I didn't like the film.
6,
His mother sent him to bed because he'd been naughty.
7,
I'd burnt the chicken, so we went out to eat.
8,
Jill invited me to stay for lunch, but I'd arranged to have lunch with Joe.
9.8. An interview with Liz Davis.
Hello and welcome to Book World. This week in the studio we have Liz Davis from YAP, Young Adult Publishers. Liz, many people get confused about the difference between children's literature and young adult literature. Are they sometimes the same thing?
Yes, they can be. Some of our books are for children as young as 12, and they aren't very different from other children's books. But many of the novels we publish are for 15 to 18-year-olds, and the stories and subjects in those are not what you usually find in children's literature. They're, well, more adult.
Now, children's literature is very big business at the moment. Is that because of the recent popularity of young adult fiction?
No, not really. We're in a golden age of children's literature for all ages right now. And it isn't the first golden age. There have been 3. The first came in the 19th century, with the earliest fantasy books for children. Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan were the first novels where ordinary children had adventures in a magical world.
And until then, children's books had been quite serious and educational, hadn't they?
Oh, yes. People thought children's stories should teach them morals. They were about children getting into dangerous situations in life because they'd behaved badly, and only the well-behaved children managed to escape. There's a lovely story called The Storyteller by a writer called Saki, which makes fun of this idea.
And when was the second Golden Age?
In the 1950s. There'd been the Second World War and the atomic bomb, and a lot of children's stories were now more serious, about saving the world from evil. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is a good example, and C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. It's not just the children in the story that are in danger, it's everything.
And isn't that true of a more recent example of young adult fiction, the Harry Potter series?
Yes, although I'm not sure it's correct to call the Harry Potter books young adult fiction. They were the first children's books that people of all ages read, from the very young to the very old. It's only the later Harry Potters, when the children become teenagers, that are more like young adult literature. But they're still not typical examples, because they're all about the problems of using magic. Modern young adult novels are usually about the ordinary, everyday problems that teenagers experience.
So the stories aren't set in fantasy worlds anymore?
No, not so much. Some are. The Hunger Games books, for example. But most young adult literature is set in the very real world that teenagers live in.
Too real for some parents.
Yes, that's true. In the past, people often complained that young people's literature had never shown the reality of teenage life. Now, many parents aren't happy to find their children reading books that go into so much detail about relationships with the opposite sex and about alcohol and drugs.
And how do you feel about that?
Well, these problems are part of life for teenagers today, and I think it helps if they see people learning to get through them. What I don't like is when young adult novels end miserably. I know most teenagers like to be miserable sometimes, but I think they're looking for a happy ending, really.
9.9 The Storyteller Part 1.
It was a hot afternoon, and the hour-long train journey had only just begun. There were 5 people in the railway carriage, 2 young girls and their brother, sitting with their aunt, and a young man, who was sitting alone in the corner. The young man had already begun to think he'd chosen the wrong carriage to sit in. The children were hot, tired, and bored, and behaving badly. The youngest girl was singing the first line of a song over and over again.
Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's.
Everything the aunt said began with don't, and everything the children said began with why.
Don't put your feet on the seat, Cyril. Why not? Because you'll make it dirty. And don't stare at the man. Oh, look at those sheep in that field.
Nearly every field the train had travelled past had had sheep in it, so the aunt's surprise was difficult to explain.
Why is that man taking the sheep into the other field?
Asked the younger girl.
Perhaps there's more grass in that field,
replied the aunt.
But there's lots of grass in both fields.
Well, perhaps the grass is better in the other field. Why is it better?
Came the immediate question from Cyril. The young man was looking annoyed.
I imagine he doesn't like children,
the aunt thought.
Come and sit over here, all of you, and I'll tell you a story,
she said.
(9.10) The Storyteller, Part 2. The Aunt's Story.
The children did not look at all excited by the aunt's offer. They'd obviously heard her stories before, And this one was very boring indeed. It was about a beautiful young girl who worked very hard and behaved perfectly. Everyone in the village loved her. One day she fell into a lake, and of course, everybody ran to save her immediately.
So they saved her because she was so good?
Asked the bigger girl.
Exactly so,
Said the aunt.
But that's silly.
Said the girl.
When people are in danger, you always try to save them. You don't ask whether they're good or not.
Well, perhaps they ran a little faster to save her because she was so good.
The aunt replied.
Oh, how stupid.
Said the girl.
It's definitely the most stupid story I've ever heard.
Said Cyril.
It was so stupid, I didn't even listen to it.
The younger girl said, and began singing the first line of her song again.
You're not a great success as a storyteller,
said the young man suddenly from the corner.
Well, it's not easy to tell stories that young people can understand and enjoy.
The aunt replied, sounding stressed.
I don't agree,
said the young man.
Well, perhaps you would like to tell them a story then,
she suggested.
Okay,
said the young man, and he began.
9.11 The Young Man's Story.
Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a little girl called Bertha who was very, very good.
The children looked disappointed. They had hoped for a better story from him.
She was always well behaved and worked hard at school because she wanted to please her parents and teachers. She was never late, never dirty or untidy, never rude, and she never told lies.
Was she pretty?
Asked the small girl.
Not as pretty as you,
the young man said.
But she was horribly good.
The children were suddenly interested. Using the word horribly with good was unusual, and they liked how true it sounded.
Bertha was so good that she'd won 3 medals for it. One said never late, one said always polite, and the third said best behaved child in town. She wore them every day as she walked around town, so that everyone knew how good she was.
Horribly good,
Cyril reminded him.
Yes. Well, the king had heard how good this girl was, and he invited Bertha to tea at the royal palace. Bertha wore her best dress, which was very white and clean, put on her medals and walked through the woods towards the king's palace. But in the woods, there lived a big, hungry wolf. He quickly saw Bertha's clean white dress through the trees. Aha, thought the wolf. Lunch. He moved quickly and quietly through the trees towards Bertha. Bertha saw the wolf and ran, but it was difficult to run fast because of the medals. She hid in some bushes, but she was shaking with fear, and the wolf could hear the medals clinking together. He caught her and ate every bit of her, except for the medals, of course.
Oh!
9.12 The End of the Story.
What a terrible story to tell young children,
the aunt complained.
No, it's not. It's the most beautiful story I've ever heard,
said the smaller girl.
It's the only beautiful story I've ever heard,
said Cyril.
Well, at least I did manage to keep them quiet for a while,
said the young man as he got up to leave the train.
Goodbye.
(9.13) How did you feel? 1.
I was scared because the lights had gone out.
2.
I was jealous because my sister got the biggest bedroom.
3.
I was nervous because I hadn't sung in public before.
4,
I was upset because my best friend had forgotten my birthday.
5,
I was disappointed because the restaurant wasn't very good.
6,
I was proud because my photo won first prize.
9.14 Talking about feelings. 1,
Sometimes I feel really homesick.
I'm sure you do. What do you miss the most?
2,
I've got too much work to do.
You'll manage. You're just stressed right now.
3,
I'm worried about my driving test.
It's normal. I was nervous when I took mine.
4,
We're going to have a baby.
Oh, that's fabulous! I'm delighted for you both.
5,
I get upset when people are so horrible.
Well, remember that people can be really nice too.
9.15 Exclamations with so and such.
That was such an amazing film.
I was so scared.
9.16
I was so surprised.
It was such a shock.
I've had such an awful day.
You have such crazy ideas.
We had such terrible weather.
There were so many people in town.
She sings so beautifully.
I've got so much work.
9.17 1,
This is such a good novel. You must read it. Do you want to borrow it now?
2,
Don't watch that film on your own. It's so scary. I had my eyes closed for a lot of it.
3,
Susie and John are such nice people. They're always so friendly and helpful.
4,
There are so many pizzas to choose from. I can't decide which one to order.
5,
Why are you driving so fast? We're not in any hurry.
6,
Oh, you've made such a mess in the kitchen. Come and clean it up now.
7,
I've spent so much money this week. I should leave my credit card at home.
8,
That was such an amazing experience. It's the first time I've been to an IMAX cinema.